Cool. Well, let's get started at this 10 o'clock hour central here in Minnesota. My name is Sonia Tostison. I am the volunteer and programs coordinator with the University of Minnesota's Urban Forestry Outreach and Research Lab, and I am host of the MnSTAC forums today. So we host free monthly forums for MnSTAC, the Minnesota Shade Tree Advisory Committee. So they're pretty much monthly. Next month, which is already in a couple weeks, we have the Shade Tree Short Course coming up, which is a huge event at Bethel College. We will have, and we also have our weekly newsletter, so I'll drop that in the chat, a link to sign up if you aren't hooked in already. Today's presentation is by Madisson Masucci. She is the Urban and Community Forestry Coordinator with the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. And the presentation is going to be an overview of the DNR's Urban and Community Forestry Program, get the ins and outs. If you have questions, please type them in the chat. We will save them till the end, and I'll help monitor those questions, Maddie, and get those to you at that time. We are recording this presentation, so it will be posted later on the MnSTAC YouTube playlist. We are going to keep it mostly to the presentation. So the Q&As at the end may or may not be included. And those of you viewing this live, we will be getting a 1 ISA CEU credit. So we'll drop that into the link, into the chat toward the end of the presentation. So with no further ado, Maddie, you can take it away.
Sounds good. Welcome, everyone. My name is Maddie Masucci, and like Sonia said, I'm the Urban and Community Forestry Coordinator for the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. And I'm going to apologize. I have a little cough right now, so excuse me. Today, I'm going to walk you through some of the specifics on what we do at the DNR to support communities, what work has looked like over the past several years, our relationship with our partnering organizations. I'm so sorry, guys. Excuse me. Including U.S. Forest Service, University of Minnesota, and the Minnesota Shade Tree Advisory Committee, and some of the exciting things we're looking forward to over the next year. Just one second. Okay, so let's get into it. Most of you are probably familiar with everything here on the screen, so I'll just quickly outline these points for those of you who may not know all of them. Humans have been planting trees alongside the areas we live to take advantage of the benefits they provide for a very long time. Colonization and the creation of permanent European settlements across the United States created the scene for urban and community forestry in our country. Unfortunately, these early urban tree plantings were planned without acknowledging potential insect and disease issues, which set the stage for Dutch elm disease nationwide to ravage our urban trees. This led to heavy losses in Minnesota throughout the 1960s and 70s. Following this, the urban and community forestry field realized we needed to shift towards a more comprehensive planning and management strategy for greater diversity of trees. During all this devastation, Tree City USA was launched by the Arbor Day Foundation in 1976 to set national standards for urban forestry. The Cooperative Forestry Assistance Act of 1978 followed, which formally created an urban forestry program within the USDA Forest Service. This was followed by the Farm Bill of 1990, which created the Urban and Community Forestry Program as it stands today. So part of the current structure with the U.S. Forest Service Urban and Community Forest Program is that it created standards that the states have to meet in order to be eligible for what we call core funding. This core funding is an annual pot of money that helps us to meet these standards and operate our urban and community forestry program here in the state. These standards include having an urban and community forestry coordinator, which is me, housed at the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, having an urban and community forestry volunteer and partnership coordinator, which is Sonia Tostison at the University of Minnesota, having a tree advisory board, which MnSTAC fills that role for us, and having a forest action plan. Ours was most recently updated in 2020, and that gets updated every 10 years to stay current. Now that we've gone over what we have to have in order to meet those core requirements, let's talk about all the people who make our urban and community forestry program run in both the Minnesota DNR and the University of Minnesota. So starting off in the DNR, we have Valerie McClanahan, who's our CFM assistant supervisor. Myself, Madisson Masucci, is the urban and community forestry coordinator. Molly Cotting is our community environmental justice coordinator. Rachel Maurice and Mark Cruz are our community forest project specialists, and we have a third position that's currently vacant. We are working on filling. And then we have 22 cooperative forest management foresters spread across the state who have about 10 to 30% of their time allocated to urban and community forestry. Over at the U of M, which we provide that pass-through funding for, we have Ryan Murphy, who is the U4 lab supervisor. Sonia Tostison is the urban and community forestry volunteer and partnership coordinator. Dan Jertson, who's the arboriculture program coordinator and educator. Marissa Enders, who's on the urban and community forestry staff, and various undergraduate students who are working to help do all of the amazing work they do. So part of the reason we've seen so much expansion over the past few years within our staffing is that there have been an unprecedented amount of funding being dedicated to help communities with urban and community forestry work. We've been so lucky in our state to be able to help communities to the extent that we have. And we know there's still a huge demand in urban and community forestry grant funding that we're working hard to meet. So this is a bird's eye overview of all of the funding pots we have this fiscal year. So starting off with Minnesota Relief, we had $7.998 million allocated to fiscal year 24, and those contracts are in place and work is being done under that funding right now. We have an additional $7.998 million that was allocated in fiscal year 25 that we will be opening up requests for applications at some point this year with that funding. And then we have an ongoing $400,000 of dedicated relief funding into the future annually. And then moving on to bonding, we have $10 million that is appropriated into grant funds now. So communities are doing great work with that funding already. LCCMR, we received $2.4 million on the last round of applications, and that work is ongoing as well. We also have community tree planting grants for $5 million that will be opening up for requests for applications as well later this year. And then we were also allocated $300,000 from the state legislature for zoo planting grants that we're working on getting in contract with the Como Zoo and the Lake Superior Zoo. Very exciting. And then the three underlined funding sources on the right side of the slide are federally funded sources. As we know, there's been a lot of concern over what's state funded versus federally funded. So I just underline those federal funds to help you understand where each of these funds are coming from. So first off, the Inflation Reduction Act, we received $5.25 million from that funding, and we're working on getting those funds in contract with people right now. And then the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law Act, we received $415,110. We're also working on getting those contracts in place. And then this core funding, $2.68 million. That is 5 years worth of core funding kind of lumped into one pot because we get an annual allotment that's good for 5 years. So we have that 5-year period to spend it. And we get new funding each year as that 5th year expires. So much of our funding has come from state legislature or state sources, but we do have some larger funding through the federal government as well that we wanted to point out. So what are we trying to do with all this money? We're trying to increase services by creating and maintaining healthy urban and community forests across the state. Some of you may know there's a statewide initiative to reach 30% canopy cover by 2030 and 40% by 2050 as well. We're working on supporting communities to be able to achieve those goals. Funding through grants is one of the ways we do that, but there are also numerous other things that we're doing to help meet this goal as well. We provide direct assistance to communities in the form of connecting them to different resources, hosting various programs, supporting educational opportunities, and providing technical guidance. Technical assistance may include guiding best management practices, guiding the development of city ordinances, providing species recommendations, planting plans, forest management plans in general, and connecting communities to resources to accomplish urban and community forestry work. Outreach opportunities and support may look like providing in-person support when requested at city or community events, such as Arbor Day, tree plantings with local groups, National Night Out, and cultural events. We also work with schools to provide urban and community forestry content in addition to general forestry content. Then we also provide educational support through partnering with University of Minnesota and the Minnesota Society of Arboriculture to provide several education opportunities throughout the year, including the Shade Tree Short Course and other conferences and events. Part of our partnership with University of Minnesota includes that pass-through funding to be able to help them do all the amazing work that they do. Shade Tree Short Course is probably one of the most well-known educational events that U of M hosts in partnership with us and other organizations. But our partnership also supports providing the MnSTAC forums, which we're in today, youth engagement programs, and arboriculture education and programming as well. And then another joint partnership between us and the University of Minnesota is Tree Inspector. The University of Minnesota provides the educational components for certification and recertification of Tree Inspector, while the DNR maintains the database and sends out the Tree Inspector cards. Tree Inspector is a legislatively mandated program that trains and certifies people in the basics of shade tree management. And we have more than 700 certified tree inspectors statewide, which is awesome to see. Our partnership also supports a few positions at the University of Minnesota, including the Arboriculture Program Coordinator Educator position. Dan Jertson's in this role, and he develops professional relationships with local units of government and private industry to support education needs, provide arboriculture education events, and serve as a connection point with Shade Tree Short Course, MSA, and other arboriculture education. This position helps us to assess the industry education needs and work to meet those needs. And as I mentioned earlier, another position of this core funding supports at the U of M is the Volunteer and Partnerships Coordinator position Sonia Tostison is in. Sonia's position is a requirement to be eligible for that core funding, and we meet this through a longstanding partnership with the university. Sonia oversees the Tree Care Advocate Program, which is an umbrella that includes Tree Care Advisor and Tree Stewards. And Tree Stewards is a community-based volunteer program where residents of a community can get involved in caring for the trees in their neighborhoods. Tree steward groups work with their city or county staff to determine the needs of caring for their community trees and are trained by U of M staff to be able to get out in the community and do basic tree care tasks like planting, watering, mulching, and young tree pruning. They may also be trained on identifying tree diseases and pests to be able to keep an eye on those community trees. Tree Care Advisors, on the other hand, is a program that aids in the development of environmentally focused residents through education and the promotion of volunteerism. Tree Care Advisors are individuals who go through a training program and then are able to serve in volunteer roles as educators and facilitators in urban and community forestry spaces across the state. So As part of our core funding agreement, we report all of this amazing work to the U.S. Forest Service using what's called the Community Accomplishment Reporting System, or better known as CARS for short. And CARS helps us to keep track of how many managing and developing communities we have in the state, and those numbers go into determining our federal core funding levels. A managing community must have all 4 of the following. First off, a management plan that is 10 years old or less, and that needs to be informed by a tree inventory. The second requirement is having staff with relevant qualifications and continuing education dedicated to tree work. The third item is a tree-focused ordinance. And the fourth is having a tree advisory board or committee. And then a developing community, on the other hand, may have 1, 2, or 3 of those listed criteria. So let's take a look at our numbers from 2019 to now. Our percent of population living in managing communities did decline. However, I will caveat that with our standards for tracking and updating whether communities were actually meeting these standards was changed in 2019, and we're now reflecting a more accurate number of managing communities. Our percent of population living in developing communities has increased, as well as our number of people living in communities receiving assistance, and our number of communities who have received financial assistance during the federal fiscal year has grown as well, which is great to see. So we'll dive into the financial aspects of our program a little more. And this shows you all of our expenditures for the federal fiscal year 2024. As you can see, 92% of our funding was state funded, and that's split out on the right side of the slide. You can see there's about 70% of it came from the general fund, 25% of it came from LCCMR, and 5% of it came from shade tree bonding, whereas federally funded expenditures only made up about 8% of our total expenditures. We'll get into what that 8% looks like per grant. As you can see on this slide, we have fiscal year 19 core, fiscal year 20 core, fiscal year 21 core, and fiscal year 22 and 23 combined core. Like I mentioned earlier, those core funding sources are good for 5 years. So in any given year, we're likely going to show that we're expending out of 5 separate years of core. And then just a small percentage of our expenditures last year went to Inflation Reduction Act funding as well. So taking a slightly different lens on our federal funding, you can see how we broke down expenditures by description. So last year, about 36% of our funding went to nonprofit grants, 24% went to community grants, and 37% went to the University of Minnesota to provide those pass-through services. And then 2% was for federal indirect, and 1% was for MnSTAC and MSA. So looking more at a big picture here from 2019 to 2024, you can see we have gone up in expenditures year over year on a fairly consistent basis. Our state funding expenditures in particular have exploded due to historic investment from our state legislature and LCCMR in urban and community forestry, including programs like Relief, Preparing for EAB, and Protect Community Forests. As I mentioned earlier, we will have some more state funding opportunities opening up later this year. And we anticipate to continue to see large expenditures for state funding over the next few years. So moving on to looking at how this financial assistance is helping communities across the state. From 2019 to now, the map on the left shows all the grantees we've been able to assist. The grantees are split out by state funded grants, federal grantees from core funding, Inflation Reduction Act grantees, and bipartisan infrastructure law grantees. We've helped 170 grantees with all of this funding and continue to expand the organizations and communities reached with every new grant opportunity we are able to access. So how do we at DNR interact with MnSTAC? The DNR provides support for the board meetings, such as staffing minutes, snacks, and hosting space for meetings. We also provide joint council meeting financial support for outstate board members to be able to travel to meetings. And we provide funding to the University of Minnesota to manage the monthly education forums and newsletters. And finally, we provide monthly agency updates to the MnSTAC board. So in order to ensure we are hearing from urban and community forestry folks and properly leveraging our resources to advance urban forests, we need the MnSTAC board to provide key input in a few different ways. The first being the Forest Action Plan for Minnesota, and that dictates the way that our federal funding can be spent. Like I said, this plan gets updated every 10 years, and it's important we gather feedback from the board on the current issues, impacts, and decisions that should be factored into each forest action plan. Our current forest action plan was written in 2020, and we're halfway through this 10-year period. So that'll be coming up as something we need to keep on our radar in the near future here. The second thing we'd like to request feedback on is the annual core narrative. As long as the state's meeting the 4 core requirements we discussed at the beginning of this presentation, the U.S. Forest Service provides a core grant annually to further urban and community forestry efforts within the state. This annual allotment requires us to write a core narrative detailing how we intend to spend the money. We'd like to garner feedback on what to include within that narrative and any special concerns or projects we should focus on from year to year. We also need MnSTAC to provide us with general community feedback on urban and community forestry needs. You all are out there doing the work day to day and have the most direct access to the issues, concerns, and opportunities for our field. We need you to share those with us so we can do our best to try to address those problems and opportunities as we have the resources to do so. That also connects to the next bullet point of interacting with communities to ensure adequate representation. Being the eyes and ears on the ground in your day-to-day job allows you to be much more engaged with communities across the state, and we appreciate that connection and input as much as possible. Finally, we will request that you're able to participate in grant review when the capacity is there. We'd like to bring in external partners on our grant review committees to ensure we get a more diverse set of voices at the table discussing grant awards. Typically, we have 1 to 2 grant opportunities a year, though that fluctuates based on the year. And during the grant review process, we ask our reviewers to read through all of the applications and score them based on the request for application scoring rubric. And then we meet in person to discuss the scores for each applicant and determine awards for the grant program. All of these things help us to more effectively communicate or to connect with communities and resources to guide management of urban and community forestry across the state. So one of the major goals we're working towards, like I mentioned earlier, is as a state, we're trying to reach that 30% canopy cover by 2030 and 40% by 2050. This is a governor's objective that can be found in the Climate Action Framework. In order to meet this goal, we need to focus on 2 things: maintaining existing canopy through large tree maintenance and preservation, and planting new trees in low canopy areas. We cannot plant our way into meeting this goal alone, so we have to focus on both prongs of this approach. Maintaining and preserving existing mature trees as much as possible helps us keep the benefits that these trees are already providing, as well as balances the urban canopy with a multi-age class diversity that helps us be more resilient overall. To know if we're on track for this goal, we obtain LCCMR funding to conduct an assessment of urban canopy in communities across the state to assess those current canopy levels. This research is being finalized now, and we hope to have the results of the canopy assessment soon to start understanding where communities are at and plan for this goal. We're also committed to furthering education and professional development within the industry, and I wanted to point out a few of the great opportunities in our field that you may or may not be aware of. First, the youth engagement in our arboriculture program provides a variety of great content and event opportunities for ages 5 to 25. The AmeriCorps programs listed here are great limited term positions that pair AmeriCorps members with an organization to work in a wide variety of environmental career paths. Minnesota Society of Arboriculture has the scholarship for underserved arborists to help cover the cost of taking the ISA exam. And finally, the state arborist apprenticeship exists, and we were part of its development. Full disclosure, it does need some work moving forward to be a little more functional, and we're hoping to revisit that in the future. So what can you expect to see from us moving forward? We'll continue to work on all of this awesome programming, including our upcoming state funding opportunities, continuing technical assistance statewide, partnering with different organizations, being at different events and outreach opportunities. We'll also be partnering with Minnesota Society of Arboriculture on the Festival of Trees on May 17th, again this year in coordination with TCC. And we'll be at the Shade Tree Short Course on March 11th and 12th coming up here, just like Sonia said, in a few weeks. So I'd be happy to connect with people at either of these events and chat about trees. Think that wraps up my content. So we can go for any questions.
Awesome. Yeah, just if anybody has questions, you feel free to unmute yourself and ask them verbally, or you can always place them in the chat. I haven't seen any questions pop up yet in the chat, so give folks a minute or two, or think of them. Thank you, Maddie, for that presentation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also, if anyone's curious, I will, in the YouTube playlist where we'll post the recording of the presentation, I will try and put many of the links to resources directly in the description. So you'll be able to find them there too. Don't have to search through everything. Oh, great. We have a couple coming in. First one is, do you have a general month range when relief and planting grants are released?
So right now we don't have a general month range. I'm sorry, I can't be more specific. We're waiting on some internal guidance to be able to release that. So as soon as we can, we want to, but I can't give you a date right now, unfortunately.
Yeah, we always try and put them in the MnSTAC newsletter, the Minnesota Shade Tree Advisory Committee. I say the acronym a lot, but in case you don't know that acronym super well. So that's in the weekly newsletter as well. And then next question is, with respect to the 2030 goal, how do you factor in ash tree loss?
Yeah, so that's part of the intent for that LCCMR funding, to get a canopy assessment, to understand not only where the canopy currently is sitting, but based on tree inventories, what we might be looking at for tree loss as well. It'll help us to inform where we can go from here, because we know obviously emerald ash borer is spreading outstate Minnesota right now, and we're going to continue to see losses throughout the entire state. So we're going to get all of this data together and kind of start creating a plan from there, is the hope. And then We will be applying for a new LCCMR grant to review actual available planting space with respect to ash losses as well.
Great, awesome. Next question is, would community tree planting grants be restricted to public property?
Valerie, do you have the answer on that? Just
So it depends. So there's a couple of grants. One of them is specifically called community tree planting, which is just like the appropriation language. So that one is restricted to public tree planting. However, Minnesota Relief is not. Minnesota Relief, we intend at this point to run it similarly to how we did last year, which is to allow for work on private property, but it does need to be low income property. So that is something to take into account. If we can fund private, we always try to, because we know that that's a huge gap. But often we're limited to what, who gave us the money and how they wrote the language.
Thank you. Awesome. Thanks, Val. Next question. And this is a follow-up. To clarify, the tree planting grant is different than the Met Council grant, correct?
yes, the Met Council has their own funding under similar appropriation. So it'll be similar language, but they will be running their own grant program separate from ours.
Awesome. Well, that is the last question. Oh, wait, got another one. Bumpity bum. The question is, will there be an informational session on the relief grants in the future to provide more details?
Yes, we are hoping to have a similar program for outreach as our last round, where we have in-person informational sessions. As soon as we get a release date and our plan to move forward, we'll start planning those and make those available for you guys to come join us and chat about relief grants.
Yeah. Next question is the Met Council funding available outside of the 7-county metro area?
I believe that the Met Council funding is exclusive to the metro area, but you'll have to follow up with Met Council to verify that.
All right, I think those are all the remaining questions. I will maybe leave it open for a minute here, but we can also put the ISA CEU. I just popped that into the chat. So I hope I'll wait a minute and make sure people can access it. And I've released all the permissions so you can get into that Google form. And then we'll submit that to ISA and you should see those credits later in the coming weeks. Yeah, awesome. Okay, well, where I'm assuming that's the ISA link. It just says where will you see the ISA? I'm not super familiar with ISA CEU. I would assume you could check your account. I'm not a certified arborist, but awesome. Well, thank you, Maddie, very much for your presentation today. And as we mentioned, we'll have this recorded and posted up later. The ISA, oh, here, clarification. ISA website shows your CEU points in your profile. So that's where you'll check them. And they're updated periodically. So, well, thank you. And thank you for everybody on the MnSTAC board and for all the work that they do. And thank you for all the communities and people like you doing the work out there on the ground. So thank you. Without further ado, I think we can end it there. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.